At 2,430 meters above sea level, where the air grows thin and the world falls away into endless green valleys, something impossible was born from human hands and unshakable determination. In the year 1450, when Europe was just awakening from medieval slumber, Inca engineers were solving construction challenges that would humble modern architects. They carved a city from living rock, not on gentle plains or river valleys, but on a knife-edge ridge where one wrong step meant falling into oblivion. They moved stones weighing 50 tons up slopes so steep that mountaineers today use ropes and safety equipment just to climb them empty-handed. Without wheels, without iron tools, without written blueprints, they created Machu Picchu, 200 structures of such precision that 5 centuries later, earthquake after earthquake has failed to disturb a single stone from its perfect place. Tonight, we climb those same misty paths that Inca builders once walked. We follow their footsteps to the clouds, where human vision transformed an impossible mountain peak into humanity's most breathtaking architectural achievement. This is the story of how they did it, stone by stone, dream by dream, in the realm where earth touches sky. Welcome to the sleepy structures, where ancient architecture becomes bedtime storytelling, and the greatest buildings in human history unfold their secrets in gentle whispers. I'm here to guide you through the remarkable engineering achievements of our ancestors, the patient craftsmen who carved monuments from solid stone, raised temples that touch the heavens, and created wonders that still inspire awe thousands of years after their completion. Tonight, we journey to the cloud forests of Peru to explore how the Inca civilization accomplished what seems impossible even today. How did they transport massive granite blocks up vertical mountain faces? How did they cut stone with such precision that no mortar was needed? How did they create structures that have survived centuries of earthquakes in one of the world's most seismically active regions? These are the questions that will carry you gently into sleep as we explore the construction techniques, the human ingenuity, and the sheer determination that created Machu Picchu, the lost city in the clouds that continues to whisper the secrets of ancient engineering mastery. Rest comfortably. Let your mind wander to misty mountain peaks and the sound of bronze tools against granite as we begin our peaceful exploration of humanity's greatest high-altitude architectural achievement. The story of Machu Picchu begins now. Standing on the narrow ridge of Huayna Picchu, gazing down at the architectural marvel spread below, the human mind struggles to comprehend what ancient eyes accomplished in this realm of clouds and stone. Machu Picchu represents perhaps the most audacious construction project in human history, not because of its size, for other civilizations built larger monuments, but because of where it was built, and how it was built, and the impossible challenges that had to be overcome with every single stone that was placed. At 2,430 meters above sea level, the air contains 30% less oxygen than at sea level. Modern visitors arrive by train and bus, yet still feel lightheaded and breathless. Imagine the Inca workers who spent years at this altitude carrying massive stones, carving intricate details, performing physical labor that would challenge even well-conditioned athletes at sea level. The site itself defies every principle of sensible construction. The ridge between Huayna Picchu and Machu Picchu mountains is barely wide enough for the structures that crown it. A knife edge of rock suspended between two peaks, with sheer drops of over 400 meters on 3 sides. One miscalculation, one poorly placed stone, one moment of lost balance, and workers would plummet into the cloud forest below. Yet the Inca engineers surveyed this terrifying landscape and saw not obstacles, but opportunities. Where others would see impossible vertical faces of granite, They envisioned terraced gardens cascading down the mountainside. Where others would see howling Andean winds and brutal weather, they saw a natural fortress protected by the mountains themselves. The construction challenges began before the first stone was even quarried. Everything needed to build a city, tools, food, workers, materials, had to be carried up treacherous mountain paths that twisted through cloud forests so dense that sunlight barely penetrated to the forest floor. These weren't broad Roman roads built for carts and pack animals. These were narrow footpaths barely wide enough for a single person, carved into cliff faces that dropped away into misty chasms. The Inca possessed no wheeled vehicles, no beasts of burden larger than llamas, no iron tools, no complex mathematics as we understand them, no written language to preserve engineering knowledge. Yet they undertook a construction project that required moving an estimated 50,000 tons of precisely cut granite blocks up a mountain that modern engineers would consider inaccessible for heavy construction. The precision achieved at Machu Picchu surpasses many modern buildings. Stones fit together so perfectly that not even a knife blade can slip between them. These aren't roughly hewn blocks held together with mortar. These are individually sculpted pieces of granite, each one shaped to fit exactly with its neighbours, creating walls that have flexed and bent with earthquake tremors for over 5 centuries, without a single stone falling out of place. The architectural planning required 3-dimensional visualization skills that seem almost supernatural. Unlike civilizations that built on flat ground where mistakes could be corrected and additions could be made, every element of Machu Picchu had to be perfect from the moment of conception. There was no room for error on a mountaintop where space was measured in meters rather than kilometers. Consider the Temple of the Sun, built on a natural rock outcrop that the architects incorporated into their design. The curved wall follows the contours of the living rock beneath, creating a seamless fusion between human craftsmanship and natural formation. The precision required to calculate these curves, to cut stones that would follow the irregular shape of bedrock to ensure that the structure would be both beautiful and structurally sound. This level of integrated design thinking wouldn't be seen again until the Renaissance masters of Europe. The Intihuatana stone, the ritual rock at the heart of the complex, demonstrates astronomical knowledge that rivals modern understanding. This carved granite pillar serves as a precise sundial, marking solstices and equinoxes with shadows that fall exactly where the ancient astronomers intended. The calculations required to orient this stone correctly, accounting for the site's latitude, elevation, and the movement of celestial bodies throughout the year. This mathematical achievement was accomplished by people who supposedly had no complex number systems. The agricultural terraces that step down the mountainside in perfect geometric progression represent another impossible achievement. Each terrace required tons of soil to be carried up from the valleys below, stone by stone, creating retaining walls that could hold this precious earth against the constant threat of landslides and erosion. The irrigation system that waters these terraces channels mountain springs through carefully calculated gradients, ensuring that water flows evenly across every level without washing away the carefully transported soil. The residential areas demonstrate urban planning principles that wouldn't be formally recognized by European architects for centuries. Buildings are oriented to maximize solar gain during the short mountain growing season, while providing shelter from the fierce winds that howl across the ridges. Drainage systems prevent the accumulation of water that could destabilize foundations carved from living rock. Storage areas are positioned to maintain consistent temperatures for preserving food supplies that had to last through long periods when mountain weather made transport impossible. Perhaps most remarkably, this entire construction project was completed in less than a century. From the first survey of the site to the final placement of the last carved stone, Machu Picchu rose from empty mountaintop to completed city in a time frame that modern construction projects would consider impossibly ambitious, even with mechanized equipment and unlimited budgets. The achievement becomes even more extraordinary when we consider that this was not the Inca Empire's only major construction project. Simultaneously, they were building roads across thousands of kilometers of mountain terrain, constructing other cities, creating agricultural systems that fed millions of people, and maintaining military campaigns across a territory that stretched from modern-day Colombia to Chile. Yet somehow, in this remote mountain location, where every tool had to be carried up treacherous paths, where every stone had to be shaped with bronze implements and human muscle, where every mistake could prove fatal, the Inca created architectural perfection that continues to inspire wonder in every visitor who makes the journey to these cloud-wrapped peaks. Machu Picchu stands as eternal proof that human ingenuity knows no boundaries, that determination can overcome any obstacle, and that the impossible becomes inevitable when vision meets unwavering commitment to excellence. But before the first stone could be shaped, before the first terrace could be carved, before any construction could begin, the Inca faced their most crucial decision. Where exactly would they build this impossible city? The selection of Machu Picchu's location wasn't a matter of convenience or accessibility. It was a profound spiritual and strategic choice that would determine the success or failure of the entire endeavor. In Inca cosmology, mountains weren't simply geographical features. They were living entities, sacred beings called apus that possessed their own personalities, powers, and preferences. The Inca understood that building on a mountain wasn't just an engineering challenge. It was entering into a sacred relationship with forces that demanded respect, understanding, and careful negotiation. Every peak in the Andes held significance, but only certain mountains possessed the spiritual and practical qualities necessary for such an ambitious construction project. Huayna Picchu, the towering peak that rises behind the ruins like a great green pyramid, translates to Young Peak in Quechua. Machu Picchu, the mountain on which the city was built, means Old Peak. This relationship between young and old, between ascending and established, between the reaching upward of human ambition and the settled wisdom of ancient stone. This symbolic geography influenced every aspect of the city's design and construction. The site's elevation at 2,430 meters above sea level placed it in what the Inca called the cloud forest zone, high enough to escape the oppressive humidity of the Amazon lowlands, yet low enough to avoid the harsh conditions of the high altiplano. This precise altitude created a unique microclimate, where rare orchids bloomed alongside carefully tended crops, where morning mists provided natural irrigation, and where the temperature remained relatively stable throughout the year. But choosing this elevation also meant accepting extraordinary construction challenges. The thin air at this altitude reduces human physical capacity by nearly a third. Modern visitors arriving from sea level experience headaches, shortness of breath, and fatigue from simple activities. The Inca construction workers had to perform demanding physical labor in these conditions day after day, year after year, with no modern understanding of altitude acclimatization or oxygen therapy. The weather patterns at this elevation created daily construction challenges that required constant adaptation. Each morning, warm air rising from the Amazon basin below collided with the cold mountain air, creating dense fog that could reduce visibility to mere meters. Workers operating on narrow ledges and precipitous slopes had to navigate by memory and touch when the world disappeared into grey nothingness around them. Afternoon thunderstorms arrived with terrifying suddenness, turning the mountain into a lightning magnet where metal tools became deadly hazards. The Inca had to develop construction schedules that worked around these predictable but dangerous weather patterns, ensuring that workers could seek shelter when the mountains exploded with electrical fury that could kill instantly. The geological survey required to assess the site's suitability demonstrates knowledge that rivals modern engineering understanding. The Inca identified the specific granite formations that would provide stable foundations, located the natural springs that would supply water to the city, and mapped the fault lines that could threaten construction stability. They understood which slopes were prone to landslides during the rainy season, and which rock faces could support the weight of massive stone structures. The mountain's orientation to the sun became a crucial factor in site selection. The ridge runs almost perfectly east-west, ensuring that buildings could be positioned to capture maximum solar energy during the brief mountain winter while avoiding excessive heat during the warmer months. This solar orientation wasn't coincidental. It represented careful astronomical observation and mathematical calculation to determine the optimal building positions. Access routes to the construction site presented challenges that would intimidate modern planners. The approach from the sacred valley below required crossing the raging Urubamba River, then climbing nearly 400 meters of vertical elevation through dense cloud forest on paths barely wide enough for single-file travel. These weren't engineered roads with gentle gradients and safety barriers. These were narrow tracks carved into living rock, with sheer drops that meant certain death for anyone who lost their footing. During the rainy season, these access paths became torrents of mud and loose rock. Construction schedules had to account for months when transport of materials became impossible, requiring careful planning to ensure that adequate supplies were stockpiled before the rains began. Workers faced the choice of remaining on the mountain through the dangerous storm season or attempting the treacherous descent to the valley, knowing they might not be able to return for months. The site's defensibility played a crucial role in its selection. Surrounded by peaks and accessible only through easily controlled pathways, Machu Picchu could be defended by a small force against much larger armies. The strategic value of this position wasn't lost on Inca planners who understood that their empire faced constant threats from neighbouring peoples and internal rebellions. Water availability determined the ultimate feasibility of the location. The Inca hydraulic engineers identified 17 natural springs on and around the mountain, calculating the flow rates and seasonal variations to ensure that a permanent population could be sustained even during the driest months. They traced the underground watercourses through the granite bedrock, understanding how seasonal rainfall patterns would affect the reliability of these precious water sources. The spiritual significance of the location extended beyond simple mountain worship. From Machu Picchu's terraces, observers could see sacred peaks in every direction, each one carefully identified and incorporated into the city's ceremonial calendar. The apus of distant mountains could be honoured with offerings and rituals timed to astronomical events that were visible from this elevated observatory. The decision to build at this specific location represented a perfect fusion of spiritual vision and practical engineering assessment. The site offered everything necessary for construction success: adequate water, defensible position, optimal solar orientation, stable geology, and spiritual significance, while presenting challenges that would test every aspect of Inca engineering knowledge and organizational capability. Standing on these windswept terraces today, looking out across the cloud-wrapped peaks that stretch to every horizon, modern visitors can sense the profound wisdom that guided the original site selection. The Inca didn't simply choose a place to build a city. They identified a location where human architecture could achieve perfect harmony with the natural world, where the impossible could become inevitable through the marriage of vision and determination. But selecting the perfect site was only the beginning. Now the real work could begin. the monumental task of moving mountains, stone by stone, to transform this sacred peak into humanity's greatest high-altitude architectural achievement. With the sacred site selected and blessed by the mountain spirits, the Inca engineers faced their next monumental challenge: how to bring tons of precisely cut granite blocks up vertical mountain faces using nothing but human strength, bronze tools, and ingenious mechanical systems that defied every limitation of their technology. The nearest suitable granite quarries lay scattered across the surrounding peaks and valleys, some as far as 15 kilometers from the construction site. These weren't convenient surface deposits that could be easily accessed. These were deep veins of high-quality stone buried within mountain hearts, requiring extensive excavation before the first usable block could even be extracted. The Inca quarry masters possessed an almost supernatural ability to read stone, identifying the natural grain patterns and internal stress lines that would determine how granite would split when subjected to carefully applied pressure. They could examine a rock face and visualize the perfect blocks hidden within, understanding exactly where to place their bronze wedges and wooden splitters to coax the stone into revealing its geometric secrets. The quarrying process began with the careful heating of selected rock faces using controlled fires built against the granite's surface. Wood gathered from the cloud forest was arranged in precise patterns, creating intense heat that would penetrate several centimeters into the stone. As the granite expanded from thermal stress, hairline fractures would appear along natural weakness planes that experienced quarry workers could detect by sound and touch. Cold mountain water was then poured over the heated stone, causing rapid contraction that widened these initial cracks into workable fissures. Bronze wedges, individually forged by master metallurgists, were driven into these openings using stone hammers that had to be perfectly balanced to deliver maximum force without shattering the precious bronze tools that were so difficult to replace at this remote altitude. Wooden wedges soaked in mountain streams were then inserted alongside the bronze implements. As the wet wood expanded, it exerted tremendous pressure along the predetermined split lines, gradually separating massive blocks from their parent formations with a precision that modern explosive techniques struggle to match. The sound of stones surrendering to human will echoed across the peaks like thunder, announcing to distant workers that another perfect building block had been born. But extracting the stone from mountain quarries was only the beginning of the transport challenge. Blocks weighing between 5 and 50 tons had to be moved across terrain that would challenge modern heavy-lift helicopters, using only human muscle power and mechanical advantage systems that the Inca developed through centuries of mountain engineering experience. The primary transport method relied on massive rope systems woven from natural fibers that grew in the cloud forests surrounding Machu Picchu. These weren't simple ropes as we might imagine them. They were complex cable systems with dozens of individual strands twisted together, using techniques that created tensile strength equivalent to modern steel cables. The knowledge required to calculate load capacities, stress distribution, and safety factors for these organic cables represented mathematical understanding that wouldn't be formally documented by European engineers for centuries. Stone blocks were secured to wooden sledges using rope harnesses that distributed weight evenly across multiple contact points, preventing the crushing forces that could split even the strongest timber. These sledges were equipped with wooden rollers cut from the hardest available trees, each roller individually shaped to maintain perfect roundness, under loads that would crush ordinary wood within meters of travel. The transport routes themselves were engineering marvels that required constant maintenance and periodic reconstruction, as mountain weather and seismic activity altered the landscape. Paths were carved into cliff faces at carefully calculated gradients that balanced the competing demands of manageable slope angles and route efficiency. Too steep, and the blocks would become uncontrollable. Too gentle, and the paths would stretch for impossible distances through terrain where every metre of construction required tremendous effort. Rope and pulley systems were installed at critical points along these transport routes, using natural rock formations and wooden frameworks to create mechanical advantage systems that allowed teams of workers to lift massive stones up vertical rock faces. These weren't simple pulleys. They were complex block and tackle arrangements that multiplied human pulling power through multiple rope passes, creating force multiplication ratios that enabled 40 workers to lift loads that would otherwise require hundreds. The coordination required for these transport operations demonstrates organisational capabilities that rival modern construction management. Teams of workers had to be precisely positioned along each rope, with experienced leaders who could read the subtle signs of rope stress, load shifting, and worker fatigue that could spell disaster if not immediately addressed. Hand signals and vocal commands had to be clearly understood across distances where the howling mountain wind could drown out normal communication. Weather conditions determined the daily transport schedule with unforgiving precision. Morning fog made the treacherous paths invisible, forcing crews to wait until the mist lifted before attempting to move loads along precipitous routes, where a single misstep could send tons of stone and dozens of workers plummeting into the cloud forest below. Afternoon thunderstorms brought lightning that could kill anyone holding metal tools or wet ropes, requiring emergency procedures to secure loads and evacuate workers to safe shelter. The physical demands placed on transport crews working at this altitude pushed human endurance to its absolute limits. The thin mountain air that contained 30% less oxygen than sea level made every breath a conscious effort, every step a calculated conservation of precious energy. Workers had to be carefully rotated to prevent altitude exhaustion that could lead to mistakes fatal to entire crews. Supply lines for the transport operations required their own complex logistics network. Food for the workers had to be carried up the same treacherous paths, competing for transport capacity with construction materials. Tool maintenance and replacement became critical challenges when a broken rope or damaged pulley could halt operations for days, while new equipment was fabricated and transported from workshops in the distant valleys. Seasonal planning determined the success or failure of major transport operations. The dry season provided stable weather but limited water for the crews, while the rainy season brought abundant water but turned the mountain paths into torrents of mud and loose rock that made heavy transport impossible. The construction schedule had to synchronize quarrying, transport and building activities to ensure that adequate materials reached the construction site before seasonal weather made resupply impossible. Quality control during transport was as demanding as during quarrying and construction. Stone blocks that survived the extraction process could still be damaged by improper handling during the journey to the construction site. Experienced inspectors examined each block upon arrival, identifying stress fractures or impact damage that could compromise structural integrity. Damaged stones were either repaired using bronze tools and stone dust mortars, or relegated to less critical applications where perfect structural performance wasn't essential. By the time each carefully quarried granite block completed its perilous journey from mountain quarry to construction site, it represented hundreds of hours of skilled labour, countless risks taken by brave workers, and engineering solutions that pushed human capability to its very limits. Yet this was still only the beginning. Now these rough-hewn blocks had to be transformed into the precision-cut architectural elements that would form Machu Picchu's eternal stone symphony. The massive granite blocks that arrived at Machu Picchu's construction site bore little resemblance to the architectural masterpieces they would become. Rough-hewn from mountain quarries, scarred by their perilous journey up treacherous slopes, These stones awaited transformation through cutting techniques so precise that modern engineers struggle to explain how such perfection was achieved without iron tools or mechanized equipment. The Inca stone carvers who performed this miraculous transformation were not merely craftsmen. They were artists, mathematicians, and engineers whose understanding of granite's molecular structure bordered on the mystical. These master workers could examine a rough block and visualize the perfect architectural element hidden within, understanding exactly how to remove unwanted stone while preserving the structural integrity necessary for earthquake-resistant construction. The primary cutting tools were bronze implements that represented the pinnacle of Inca metallurgical achievement. These weren't crude bronze tools as we might imagine them. They were precision instruments forged from carefully controlled alloys that balanced hardness with toughness, creating cutting edges that could slice through granite while remaining sharp enough for fine detail work. The bronze itself was an exact mixture of copper and tin, with trace amounts of other metals that gave the alloy properties that approached the performance of steel. Each cutting tool was individually crafted for specific tasks by master metallurgists who understood the subtle relationships between metal composition, heat treatment, and final performance. Broad chisels for removing large volumes of unwanted stone were forged differently than narrow tools designed for creating precise edges and decorative details. The knowledge required to produce these specialized implements was passed down through generations of toolmakers who guarded their secrets as jealously as any modern industrial patent. Tool maintenance became a daily ritual that determined the success or failure of cutting operations. The abrasive nature of granite dulled even the finest bronze edges within hours of use, requiring constant sharpening on whetstones that were themselves carefully selected and transported from distant quarries. Master sharpeners could restore a cutting edge to perfect geometry, using techniques that required years to master, understanding exactly how much metal to remove and at what angle to maintain optimal cutting performance. The cutting process itself began with careful measurement and marking using string lines and bronze scribes that created guide marks visible only to experienced eyes. Unlike modern construction where measurements can be verified with precision instruments, Inca stone carvers relied on proportional systems and geometric relationships that were memorized and passed down through generations of master craftsmen. The initial roughing cuts were made using bronze chisels driven by stone hammers that weighed several kilograms. The rhythm of hammer strikes echoed across the construction site like percussion music, with experienced workers maintaining steady beats that maximized cutting efficiency while conserving the precious energy required for sustained work at high altitude. The sound alone could tell supervisors which workers were maintaining proper technique and which were becoming fatigued to the point where cutting precision might suffer. As blocks approached their final dimensions, the cutting techniques became increasingly sophisticated. Abrasive powders made from crushed quartz and harder stone were mixed with water to create cutting compounds that accelerated the removal of granite, while providing the fine control necessary for achieving perfect surface finishes. These abrasives were applied using bronze tools that functioned more like files than chisels, gradually wearing away granite with thousands of precisely controlled strokes. The most challenging aspect of the cutting process was creating the complex three-dimensional shapes required for Machu Picchu's sophisticated architecture. Unlike simple rectangular blocks, many stones required curved surfaces, angled cuts, and interlocking features that had to mate perfectly with adjacent blocks. The mathematical visualization required to transform a rough quarry block into these complex shapes challenged human spatial reasoning abilities to their limits. Master stone carvers developed techniques for testing the fit of partially completed blocks, using wooden templates and measurement sticks that allowed them to verify dimensions and angles throughout the cutting process. Any deviation from the predetermined specifications could render hours or days of work useless, since mistakes in stone cutting couldn't be corrected by adding material back to an overcut surface. The precision achieved through these techniques defies modern understanding. Finished blocks fit together so perfectly that knife blades cannot penetrate the joints between stones. The surface finishes are so smooth that they appear to have been polished by machine tools, yet every surface was created using bronze implements and human muscle power, working in the thin mountain air where every breath required conscious effort. Quality control during the cutting process maintained standards that would challenge modern manufacturing facilities. Master inspectors used bronze straight edges and measurement tools to verify that each surface met the exacting specifications required for structural integrity and architectural perfection. Blocks that failed inspection were either reworked if the errors could be corrected, or relegated to less critical applications where minor imperfections wouldn't compromise the overall construction. The working conditions for stone carvers tested human endurance in ways that modern workers would find unbearable. The constant dust generated by cutting operations filled the thin mountain air with particles that irritated eyes and lungs, already struggling with a reduced oxygen content at high altitude. Workers wrapped their faces with cloth barriers and took frequent breaks to clear their airways, but respiratory problems were an accepted hazard of the profession. Temperature variations between the cold mountain nights and the intense daytime sun created thermal expansion and contraction in both the stones being cut and the bronze tools being used. Experienced carvers learned to compensate for these dimensional changes, understanding how different times of day affected the precision of their work and adjusting their techniques accordingly. The seasonal rhythm of construction work determined when the most precise cutting operations could be performed. The dry season provided stable working conditions but limited water for cooling cutting tools and settling dust. The rainy season brought abundant water but created humidity that could affect the performance of organic adhesives used to secure abrasive compounds to cutting tools. Specialized cutting techniques were developed for different types of architectural elements. Doorway lintels required perfect horizontal surfaces and precise load-bearing calculations. Window frames needed smooth edges that would channel rainwater away from interior spaces. Decorative elements demanded artistic vision combined with technical precision that could bring stone to life with flowing curves and intricate details. The apprenticeship system that trained new stone carvers ensured that cutting techniques were preserved and continuously refined across generations. Young apprentices spent years learning to maintain tools, mix abrasive compounds, and perform rough cutting operations before being trusted with precision work. Master carvers shared their knowledge freely within their workshops, understanding that the success of the entire construction project depended on maintaining the highest possible standards of craftsmanship. By the time each granite block completed its transformation from rough quarry stone to precision-cut architectural element, it represented not just skilled craftsmanship, but generations of accumulated knowledge, years of individual training, and countless hours of patient work performed under conditions that challenged every aspect of human capability. Yet even this remarkable achievement was only preparation for the next phase of construction, the assembly of these perfect stones into structures that would stand for centuries. With thousands of precisely cut granite blocks accumulating at the construction site, each one a testament to human patience and skill, the Inca master builders faced their greatest challenge yet, assembling these individual stones into architectural structures that would survive centuries of earthquakes, storms, and the relentless forces of nature without using a single drop of mortar to bind them together. This mortarless construction technique known as ashlar masonry, represented the pinnacle of Inca engineering achievement. While other civilizations relied on mortar, cement, or clay to fill gaps and bind stones together, the Inca understood that truly permanent architecture required each stone to support its neighbors through perfect geometric relationships rather than chemical adhesion that could deteriorate over time. The assembly process began with the most critical foundation stones, massive blocks that would bear the weight of entire structures while transferring loads safely into the living bedrock beneath. These foundation elements required mathematical precision that challenged the limits of human spatial reasoning, since any error in their placement would propagate upward through every subsequent course of stones, potentially compromising the structural integrity of the completed building. Master builders used bronze plumb lines and water levels to establish perfectly vertical and horizontal reference points that would guide the placement of every stone in the structure. These weren't casual measurements, they were precise geometric relationships calculated to ensure that loads would be distributed evenly through the masonry system, preventing stress concentrations that could cause catastrophic failure during seismic events. The lifting and positioning of individual blocks required mechanical systems that multiplied human strength through ingenious applications of leverage and mechanical advantage. Wooden cranes constructed from cloud forest timber were assembled at strategic locations around each building site, their bases anchored to bedrock with stone counterweights that prevented overturning when lifting the heaviest blocks. Rope and pulley systems suspended from these wooden frameworks allowed crews of workers to raise multi-ton stones to their final positions with controlled precision. The ropes themselves were engineering marvels, woven from plant fibers using techniques that created load-bearing capacities equivalent to modern steel cables. Each rope represented weeks of skilled labor by specialists who understood exactly how different fiber types and weaving patterns affected ultimate strength and flexibility. The actual placement of each stone required teamwork that bordered on choreography. Multiple crews had to coordinate their efforts perfectly, with some workers controlling the lifting ropes while others guided the suspended block into position using wooden levers and bronze pry bars. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. A stone drop from height could kill workers below and destroy weeks of careful preparation. Once a block was positioned approximately where it needed to be, the real precision work began. Using bronze tools and abrasive compounds, workers would make final adjustments to ensure perfect contact between adjacent surfaces. This might require removing just millimeters of stone from specific contact points, but the work had to be done with the multi-ton block suspended in its final position, making every chisel strike a careful balance between precision and safety. The interlocking system that held the stones together without mortar relied on complex three-dimensional geometry that distributed loads through multiple contact points rather than simple vertical stacking. Each stone was shaped to interlock with its neighbors in ways that prevented movement in any direction, creating mechanical connections that became stronger under load rather than weaker. Cornerstones and architectural transition points required the most sophisticated cutting and fitting techniques. These critical elements had to connect walls meeting at different angles while maintaining the structural continuity necessary for earthquake resistance. The geometric calculations required to determine the exact shapes needed for these complex joints challenged human mathematical abilities centuries before formal trigonometry was developed. The quality control standards maintained during assembly exceeded those of many modern construction projects. Master builders used bronze straight edges and precision measurement tools to verify that each stone was positioned exactly where the architectural plans required. Gaps between stones were measured using thin bronze gauges, and any joint wider than the thickness of these measuring tools required rework until perfect contact was achieved. Seasonal weather patterns affected assembly operations in ways that required constant adaptation of construction techniques. Cold mountain nights caused thermal contraction that could affect the fit between stones, while warm days brought expansion that had to be accounted for in the joint spacing. Experienced builders learned to time their most critical assembly operations for specific temperature conditions that provided optimal dimensional stability. The earthquake resistance built into the mortarless construction system represented engineering understanding that wouldn't be formally recognized by modern science for centuries. The flexible connections between stones allowed entire walls to move as unified systems during seismic events, absorbing and dissipating earthquake energy without suffering structural damage. The interlocking geometry that held stones together became more effective under the dynamic loads imposed by ground motion, creating structures that actually became stronger during earthquakes. Drainage considerations were integrated into every aspect of the assembly process. Joints between stones were designed to channel water away from critical structural elements, preventing the freeze-thaw cycles that could split even the strongest granite. The angles and orientations of individual stones were calculated to promote rapid water runoff, while maintaining the structural performance necessary for long-term stability. Tool maintenance during assembly operations required even more attention than during the cutting phase. Bronze implements used for final fitting work had to maintain sharp edges, capable of removing stone in controlled amounts measured in fractions of millimeters. The constant contact with abrasive granite surfaces dulled tools rapidly, requiring sharpening multiple times per day to maintain the precision necessary for perfect joint fit. The psychological demands of mortarless construction tested the mental endurance of master builders who understood that every decision they made would affect structural performance for centuries to come. Unlike construction techniques that relied on mortar to accommodate minor errors in stone cutting or placement, the ashlar masonry system required absolute precision at every stage of the assembly process. Temporary support systems were required during construction to prevent partially completed walls from collapsing under their own weight before the final stones were placed to complete the structural system. Wooden scaffolding and stone buttresses provided interim stability while allowing workers access to continue the assembly process, but these temporary supports had to be carefully designed to avoid interfering with the final structural geometry. The coordination required between different construction crews working on various parts of the same building demanded communication systems that could function in the noisy environment of active construction sites. Hand signals, voice commands, and even primitive flag systems were developed to ensure that lifting operations, stone placement, and finishing work could proceed safely and efficiently without dangerous conflicts between different work groups. Quality verification continued throughout the assembly process, with master builders regularly testing the stability and precision of completed sections before proceeding to the next phase of construction. Any defects discovered during these inspections required immediate correction, even if it meant dismantling completed work to access and replace improperly fitted stones. By the time each structure reached completion, its mortar-less construction represented not just skilled craftsmanship, but a fundamental understanding of structural engineering principles that created architecture capable of surviving anything nature could deliver. These weren't simply buildings. They were geometric puzzles solved in stone, mechanical systems that converted the destructive forces of earthquakes into harmless movement, and artistic achievements that proved human vision could triumph over any limitation. With the magnificent stone structures rising from the mountain ridge like dreams carved from granite, the Inca engineers faced a challenge that would determine whether their architectural masterpiece would thrive as a living city or remain forever an empty monument. How to bring life-sustaining water to a location where every drop had to be coaxed from reluctant mountain springs and channeled through systems that could function reliably at the edge of the sky. Water at Machu Picchu wasn't simply a convenience, it was survival itself. At this altitude, where the thin air dehydrated human bodies rapidly and the intense solar radiation increased water needs dramatically, a reliable water supply meant the difference between a thriving community and a collection of abandoned stone buildings slowly reclaimed by the cloud forest. The Inca hydraulic engineers who solved this challenge possessed knowledge that rivaled modern water management systems. They understood not just how to move water from source to destination, but how to do so in ways that worked with the mountain environment rather than against it, creating sustainable systems that could function automatically for centuries with minimal human intervention. The water supply began with an intimate understanding of the mountain's hydrological secrets. 17 natural springs were identified across the mountain complex, each one carefully mapped and analysed to determine flow rates, seasonal variations, and water quality characteristics. These weren't obvious surface springs that announced themselves with flowing streams. Many were hidden seeps and underground flows that required expertise to locate and develop. The primary spring, located on the north slope of Huayna Picchu, provided the most reliable water source for the entire complex. Inca engineers constructed an elaborate collection system that gathered water from multiple small seeps and concentrated the flow into a single channel that could be controlled and directed toward the city. This collection system included carefully placed stone barriers that created small reservoirs, allowing sediment to settle while maintaining steady pressure in the distribution network. The distribution channels that carried water throughout Machu Picchu represented masterpieces of precision engineering disguised as simple stone-lined ditches. Each channel was carved with mathematical precision to maintain exactly the right gradient, steep enough to prevent stagnation and sediment buildup, yet gentle enough to prevent erosion that could undermine the entire system. The calculations required to determine these optimal slopes, accounting for varying elevations and distances across the complex terrain, challenged the limits of mathematical knowledge available to ancient engineers. The main water channel entered the urban sector through a carefully engineered stone gateway that served multiple functions simultaneously. This entrance point included a settling basin, where any remaining sediment could be removed before water reached the residential areas, a flow control mechanism that could regulate water pressure throughout the system, and ceremonial elements that honoured the sacred nature of water in Inca cosmology. 16 ceremonial fountains received water from this primary distribution channel, each one individually designed to serve specific functions while maintaining the hydraulic performance of the overall system. These weren't simple water spouts. They were sophisticated hydraulic devices that maintained consistent flow rates despite variations in supply pressure, included overflow mechanisms that prevented flooding during periods of high water availability, and incorporated filtration systems that improved water quality for human consumption. The engineering precision of these fountains exceeded anything achieved in Europe until the Renaissance. Each fountain basin was carved from single blocks of granite with perfectly calculated dimensions that created optimal flow patterns. The water delivery channels were sized to maintain specific velocities that prevented both stagnation and turbulence, while the overflow systems were positioned to direct excess water toward agricultural areas where it could provide additional irrigation. The most remarkable fountain, located in the Temple of the Sun complex, demonstrated astronomical knowledge integrated with hydraulic engineering. The water flow was timed to align with solar observations made from the adjacent Intihuatana stone, creating a system where water ceremonies could be synchronized with celestial events throughout the year. The precision required to coordinate these hydraulic and astronomical systems represented interdisciplinary engineering that wouldn't be seen again until the modern era. Drainage systems throughout Machu Picchu were as sophisticated as the supply networks. designed to handle both normal runoff and the intense rainfall that could arrive with devastating suddenness during the mountain storm season. These drainage channels were carved into the bedrock itself, creating permanent waterways that couldn't be blocked by debris or damaged by erosion. The agricultural terraces included their own specialized water management systems that distributed irrigation water evenly across the carefully transported soil while preventing erosion that could wash away years of accumulated earth. Each terrace level included stone channels that delivered water at controlled rates, overflow mechanisms that diverted excess water to lower levels, and drainage systems that prevented waterlogging during the rainy season. Underground drainage systems beneath the main plaza and residential areas prevented water accumulation that could destabilize the foundations or create unsanitary conditions. These hidden channels were large enough for maintenance access but carefully concealed to avoid interfering with the architectural aesthetics of the completed buildings. The excavation required to create these underground systems while maintaining the structural integrity of the buildings above represented construction planning of extraordinary sophistication. Quality control for water systems required testing that ensured both hydraulic performance and water safety. Inca engineers developed techniques for measuring flow rates using bronze instruments and timing methods that allowed them to verify that each fountain and channel was performing within design specifications. Water quality was assessed using observational methods that detected contamination or mineral buildup that could affect system performance or human health. Seasonal maintenance of the water systems became a critical aspect of city operations. During the dry season, when water flows decreased, channels and fountains had to be cleaned of accumulated sediment and vegetation. The rainy season brought its own challenges, with increased flows that could overwhelm drainage systems and floods that could damage distribution channels carved into exposed bedrock. The integration of water management with other city systems demonstrated urban planning principles that wouldn't be formally recognized until the modern era. Water channels were routed to provide maximum benefit to both residential and agricultural areas, while maintaining the hydraulic performance necessary for reliable operation. The placement of fountains created social gathering spaces that enhanced community life while serving essential practical functions. Emergency water storage systems provided security against drought or system failures that could threaten the entire population. Stone cisterns were carved into bedrock at strategic locations throughout the city, sized to provide adequate reserves during periods when spring flows might be reduced, or distribution channels might require maintenance that interrupted normal water delivery. The construction techniques used for water system components had to meet even higher standards than other architectural elements, since any failure in the hydraulic systems could affect the habitability of the entire city. Stone cutting for channel construction required precision measured in millimeters rather than centimeters, while joint sealing used techniques that created watertight connections without mortar that could deteriorate over time. Temperature considerations affected water system design in ways that required understanding of thermal expansion and freeze-thaw cycles at high altitude. Channels and fountains had to be designed to accommodate ice formation during cold mountain nights while maintaining structural integrity through repeated freezing and thawing cycles throughout the year. By the time the water management systems reached completion, they represented not just engineering excellence, but a profound understanding of how human communities could thrive in harmony with challenging mountain environments. These systems didn't simply deliver water, they created the foundation for sustainable mountain civilization that could endure for centuries while maintaining the delicate balance between human needs and natural resources. With water flowing reliably through the stone channels and fountains, bringing life to the mountain city, the Inca engineers faced perhaps their most audacious challenge yet: how to create farmland where none could naturally exist. transforming vertical cliff faces into productive agricultural systems that could feed a permanent population living at the edge of the habitable world. The agricultural terraces of Machu Picchu weren't simply carved steps cut into the mountainside. They were sophisticated food production systems that defied every principle of conventional farming, creating fertile growing spaces in a location where nature had provided only vertical stone and howling wind. These terraces represented the marriage of engineering precision with agricultural science, demonstrating understanding of soil chemistry, drainage systems and crop management that wouldn't be formally documented by agricultural scientists for centuries. The construction of each terrace began with the monumental task of building retaining walls that could hold tons of imported soil against the constant threat of gravity and erosion. These weren't crude stone barriers. They were precisely engineered structures that incorporated drainage systems, load, distribution mechanisms and seismic resistance principles that ensured agricultural productivity could continue even after earthquakes that might destroy conventional farmland. The retaining walls followed the natural contours of the mountain slopes, while creating level planting surfaces that maximized usable growing area. The geometric calculations required to determine optimal terrace spacing, width, and height challenged the mathematical abilities of ancient engineers who had to balance competing demands for maximum growing space, structural stability, and efficient water distribution across the entire agricultural system. Foundation work for the terraces required excavation into solid bedrock to create stable bases that could support the enormous weight of soil-filled growing areas. Each foundation was individually designed to work with the specific geological conditions at that location, accounting for natural fissures in the bedrock, drainage patterns that could undermine stability, and seismic forces that could cause catastrophic failure if not properly anticipated. The stone cutting required for terrace construction demanded precision that exceeded even the architectural work on the ceremonial buildings. Each retaining wall stone had to fit perfectly with its neighbours, while incorporating drainage outlets, load transfer mechanisms, and soil retention features that would maintain their effectiveness for centuries of agricultural use. The interlocking stone systems used in terrace construction created structures that became stronger under a load rather than weaker, ensuring long-term stability even as the soil loads increased with successful crop cultivation. Drainage systems integrated into every terrace prevented the water accumulation that could cause catastrophic wall failures during the intense rainy season. These weren't simple holes in the retaining walls. They were engineered systems that calculated optimal drainage rates, prevented soil loss through erosion, and maintained the precise moisture levels necessary for successful crop growth. Stone-lined drainage channels carried excess water from higher terraces to lower levels, creating cascading systems that prevented any single terrace from becoming oversaturated. The soil creation process represented perhaps the most labour-intensive aspect of the entire Machu Picchu construction project. Fertile growing medium had to be transported from distant valley floors, carried up treacherous mountain paths by human porters who could manage only small loads during each exhausting journey to the construction site. Each terrace required tons of soil, representing thousands of individual loads carried by workers who faced altitude sickness, dangerous weather, and physical exhaustion that tested human endurance to its limits. Soil composition for the terraces wasn't random earth gathered from convenient locations. It was carefully engineered growing medium that combined different soil types to create optimal conditions for specific crops. Valley floor soils provided organic matter and mineral nutrients, while sand and gravel from mountain streams improved drainage characteristics, essential for preventing root rot in the high-altitude environment where temperature variations and moisture levels fluctuated dramatically. The soil transport logistics required organizational systems that coordinated the efforts of hundreds of workers across seasonal schedules that accounted for weather patterns, crop planting cycles, and the availability of human resources that were simultaneously needed for stone construction work. Supply lines for soil transport had to compete with material needs for building construction, creating complex scheduling challenges that tested the administrative capabilities of Inca project managers. Quality control for agricultural soil included testing methods that verified fertility levels, drainage characteristics, and pest management qualities that would affect crop success. Inca agricultural specialists understood how different soil mixtures would perform under specific growing conditions, adjusting compositions to optimize yields for different crop types, while maintaining long-term soil health that could sustain food production indefinitely. Crop selection for the terraced systems considered not just nutritional requirements and food preferences, but engineering factors that affected terrace stability and maintenance requirements. Root systems of different plants could either stabilize soil against erosion or create underground channels that might compromise drainage systems. The agricultural planning integrated botanical knowledge with structural engineering in ways that created mutually supportive systems where successful farming enhanced rather than threatened the underlying construction. Potato cultivation formed the cornerstone of the terrace agricultural system, with dozens of varieties selected for their ability to thrive at high altitude while providing reliable food security for the mountain population. These weren't simple potatoes as we know them today. They were specialized varieties that had been developed through centuries of selective breeding to perform optimally under the specific growing conditions found at Machu Picchu's elevation and climate. Quinoa and other high-altitude grains supplemented the potato harvest, providing protein and dietary variety essential for maintaining human health at altitude where increased metabolic demands required careful nutritional planning. The grain storage systems incorporated into the terraced areas included built-in granaries with stone-lined chambers that provided protection against moisture, pests, and temperature variations that could spoil stored food supplies. Corn cultivation on selected terraces demonstrated the remarkable adaptability of Inca agricultural systems, with varieties specifically adapted for mountain growing conditions that differed dramatically from the lowland environments where corn naturally thrived. The successful cultivation of corn at this altitude represented agricultural achievement, equivalent to modern genetic modification techniques, accomplished through patient-selective breeding and crop management techniques, passed down through generations of mountain farmers. Irrigation systems for the terraces integrated with the city's water management networks, creating distribution systems that delivered precisely controlled amounts of water to each growing area according to crop requirements and seasonal growing patterns. The irrigation channels included adjustable gates and flow controls that allowed farmers to respond to changing weather conditions while maintaining optimal soil moisture levels throughout the growing season. Seasonal farming schedules coordinated agricultural activities with construction work and ceremonial calendars, ensuring that food production needs didn't conflict with other essential activities while maximizing the productivity of the limited growing space available on the mountain terraces. Planting and harvest times were calculated to take advantage of optimal weather conditions while avoiding conflicts with the intense construction activity that continued throughout the agricultural seasons. Pest management in the terraced systems relied on integrated biological controls and crop rotation techniques that maintained healthy growing conditions without the chemical interventions available to modern agriculture. Companion planting methods used specific plant combinations that provided natural pest deterrents while maximizing the productive capacity of the limited terrace growing space. Soil maintenance and improvement techniques ensured that the terraced growing areas would remain productive indefinitely, avoiding the soil depletion that could turn the massive investment in terrace construction into worthless abandoned farmland. composting systems recycled organic waste from food preparation and human habitation into soil amendments that maintained fertility levels essential for sustained agricultural productivity. The agricultural terraces of Machu Picchu ultimately provided more than food security. They demonstrated that human ingenuity could create abundance even in the most challenging environments, transforming barren mountain slopes into productive landscapes that supported sophisticated civilization at the very limits of agricultural possibility. With the magnificent stone exteriors rising from the mountain terraces and the agricultural systems providing sustenance for a thriving community, the Inca master builders turned their attention to the most intimate challenge of all, creating interior spaces where human beings could live, work, and find shelter from the harsh mountain environment while maintaining the architectural perfection that defined every aspect of Machu Picchu's construction. The interior construction work required a fundamental shift in building techniques, moving from the grand scale of exterior architecture to the precise, human-scale details that would determine whether these stone structures could function as actual homes, workshops, and ceremonial spaces rather than merely impressive monuments to engineering capability. Interior wall construction began with the challenge of creating smooth, finished surfaces from the rough interior faces of the massive stones that formed the building shells. While the exterior faces of walls had been carefully finished during the initial construction process, the interior surfaces required additional work to achieve the level of refinement necessary for human habitation. Stone carvers working by oil lamplight used bronze tools and abrasive compounds to create wall surfaces so smooth they seemed to glow with inner light when illuminated by flickering flames. The precision required for interior finishing work exceeded even the demanding standards of exterior construction. Interior walls would be viewed and touched by inhabitants daily, making every tool mark, every imperfection, every deviation from perfect geometry immediately visible to critical eyes. Master craftsmen spent weeks on individual walls, gradually removing microscopic amounts of stone until surfaces achieved the mirror-like finish that characterized the finest Inca interior work. Doorway construction represented one of the most challenging aspects of interior work, requiring perfect integration between structural engineering and functional design. Each doorway had to be precisely positioned to provide optimal traffic flow between rooms while maintaining the structural integrity of the surrounding walls. The trapezoidal shape characteristic of Inca doorways wasn't simply an aesthetic choice. It was an engineering solution that distributed seismic forces more effectively than rectangular openings, while providing the wider base necessary for stable load transfer. The cutting and shaping of doorway openings had to be accomplished with millimeter precision, since any deviation from the planned dimensions could compromise both structural performance and functional utility. Bronze tools were used to gradually enlarge rough openings until they matched wooden templates that had been carefully crafted to ensure perfect dimensional accuracy. The process could take weeks for a single doorway, with craftsmen working in shifts to maintain progress while preserving the concentrated attention necessary for precision work. Interior window construction faced the additional challenge of providing light and ventilation while maintaining weather protection in the harsh mountain environment. Window openings were positioned to maximize solar heat gain during the cold mountain nights, while avoiding excessive exposure to the driving rains and fierce winds that could make interior spaces uninhabitable during storm seasons. The stone lintels that spanned window and doorway openings required careful calculation of load-bearing capacity combined with precise cutting to achieve the architectural proportions that characterized Inca design. Each lintel was individually carved to fit its specific opening, accounting for the irregular shapes of the surrounding stones, while maintaining the structural performance necessary to support wall loads without developing cracks or failures that could compromise building integrity. Floor construction within the stone buildings involved creating level surfaces that could provide comfortable footing while incorporating drainage systems that prevented water accumulation during the rainy season. The floors weren't simply flat stone slabs. They were carefully engineered systems that included subtle slopes for water drainage, carefully fitted joints that prevented water infiltration, and surface textures that provided secure footing even when wet from mountain storms. Stone cutting for floor construction required precision that approached modern manufacturing standards. Individual floor stones had to fit together so perfectly that joints were virtually invisible, creating continuous surfaces that appeared to be carved from single massive blocks, rather than assembled from individual pieces. The geometric calculations required to achieve this level of precision challenged the mathematical abilities of ancient craftsmen who worked without modern measuring instruments or calculation methods. Ceiling construction presented unique challenges in buildings carved partially from living rock and partially constructed from fitted stone blocks. Interior ceilings had to provide weather protection while supporting their own weight and any loads transmitted from upper floors or roof systems. The engineering calculations required to determine safe ceiling spans using available stone sizes and structural techniques pushed Inca architectural knowledge to its limits. Corbelled ceiling construction, where successive courses of stone projected inward until they met at the centre, required mathematical understanding of load distribution and structural stability that wouldn't be formally documented by European architects for centuries. Each course of ceiling stones had to be perfectly calculated to maintain structural balance, while gradually closing the overhead opening, creating interior spaces that felt both secure and spacious, despite the limitations of available building materials. Interior storage systems were integrated into the building design during construction, rather than added as afterthoughts, creating built-in storage niches and compartments that maximized the utility of limited interior space. These storage areas were carved directly into wall systems, providing secure locations for personal belongings, food supplies, and ceremonial objects while maintaining the clean architectural lines that characterized Inca interior design. The construction of interior storage required understanding of human ergonomics combined with structural engineering, ensuring that storage niches were positioned at convenient heights for daily use while avoiding locations where they might compromise wall strength or interfere with architectural proportions. Each storage niche was individually designed to serve specific functions, with dimensions calculated to accommodate particular types of objects or materials. Ventilation systems within interior spaces ensured adequate air circulation, despite the need to maintain weather protection in the harsh mountain environment. These weren't obvious ventilation openings that would compromise weather resistance. They were subtle air circulation systems that provided fresh air exchange while preventing the intrusion of rain, snow, or excessive wind that could make interior spaces uncomfortable or dangerous. Interior lighting systems relied primarily on natural light during daylight hours, supplemented by oil lamps and torch systems that could provide illumination for evening activities and work that continued after sunset. The positioning of windows and light wells was carefully calculated to provide optimal illumination for different types of interior activities while maintaining privacy and weather protection essential for comfortable habitation. The integration of heating systems into interior construction acknowledged the reality of mountain weather that could bring freezing temperatures even during summer months. Fire pits and hearth systems were positioned to provide maximum heating efficiency while incorporating smoke removal systems that prevented interior air pollution that could threaten the health of inhabitants working and sleeping in enclosed spaces. Sleeping area construction included raised platforms and alcoves that elevated sleeping surfaces above floor level, providing protection from cold air that settled near ground level, while creating comfortable spaces for rest and recovery from the physical demands of daily life at high altitude. These sleeping areas were individually fitted to maximize comfort while minimizing the space requirements that limited overall building size. Workshop areas within residential buildings included specialized features that supported different types of craft activities, from textile production to tool maintenance to food preparation. These workspaces required adequate lighting, ventilation, and storage, while providing surfaces and supports appropriate for specific types of manual labor that formed essential parts of daily life in the mountain community. The psychological aspects of interior construction received as much attention as the functional requirements, creating spaces that provided emotional comfort and aesthetic satisfaction, essential for long-term habitation in the challenging mountain environment. Interior proportions, lighting quality, and spatial relationships were designed to create environments that supported human well-being while reflecting the cultural values and artistic sensibilities that defined Inca civilization. With the interior spaces complete and every architectural detail perfected to human-scale precision, the true test of Inca engineering genius lay not in what could be seen and admired, but in what remained hidden within the very structure of the stones themselves. The earthquake-resistant engineering principles that would determine whether Machu Picchu would survive as a living testament to human achievement or crumble into rubble during the first major seismic event to strike the geologically active Andes Mountains. The Inca engineers who designed Machu Picchu's seismic resistance possessed an intuitive understanding of earthquake dynamics that wouldn't be formally recognized by modern structural engineering until the 20th century. They understood that rigid structures would shatter under seismic loads, while flexible systems could absorb and dissipate earthquake energy without suffering catastrophic failure. This knowledge guided every aspect of their construction techniques, creating buildings that would bend without breaking when the earth itself moved beneath them. The foundation systems that anchored Machu Picchu to the mountain bedrock represented the first line of defense against seismic destruction. Rather than simply placing buildings on top of the rock surface, Inca engineers carved foundation elements directly into the living bedrock, creating mechanical connections that integrated the structures with the geological formations that supported them. These weren't separate foundations that could slide or separate during ground motion. They were continuous connections between human architecture and natural stone that ensured buildings would move as unified systems with the mountain itself. The interlocking stone construction techniques that eliminated mortar from Inca masonry provided the flexibility essential for earthquake survival. When seismic waves caused ground motion, the mortarless joints between stones could accommodate movement without creating the rigid connections that would transfer destructive forces throughout the structure. Each stone could shift slightly in response to ground motion while maintaining contact with its neighbours, allowing entire walls to flex and sway without losing structural integrity. The trapezoidal shapes characteristic of Inca doorways and windows weren't merely aesthetic choices. They were earthquake-resistant design features that distributed seismic forces more effectively than rectangular openings. The wider base of trapezoidal openings provided enhanced stability during ground motion, while the sloping sides created load paths that channeled forces around openings rather than concentrating stress at vulnerable corners where cracks typically develop during seismic events. Stone-cutting precision played a crucial role in seismic performance, with a perfect fit between adjacent stones creating friction connections that could resist sliding, while still allowing the controlled movement necessary for earthquake flexibility. The contact surfaces between stones were carved with microscopic precision, that maximized frictional resistance while eliminating stress concentrations that could initiate crack propagation during dynamic loading. The three-dimensional interlocking systems that connected stones in multiple directions provided resistance to seismic forces that could arrive from any horizontal direction. Unlike simple stacked masonry that could only resist vertical loads, the Inca interlocking systems created mechanical connections that resisted overturning, sliding, and separation forces regardless of their direction or magnitude. This multi-directional resistance ensured structural stability during complex ground motions that combined horizontal and vertical accelerations. Building proportions throughout Machu Picchu reflected understanding of dynamic response characteristics that influenced how structures would behave during earthquake loading. The relatively low height-to-width ratios of most buildings created inherently stable configurations that resisted overturning, while the massive stone construction provided the inertial resistance necessary to prevent excessive dynamic amplification that could lead to structural resonance and catastrophic failure. Quality control during construction included testing procedures that verified the earthquake resistance of individual structural elements before they were incorporated into completed buildings. Master builders used techniques for evaluating joint tightness, stone stability, and overall structural integrity that ensured every component met the demanding performance standards necessary for seismic survival in one of the world's most earthquake-prone regions. The stepped terrace systems that surrounded the main buildings provided additional earthquake resistance by creating flexible retaining structures that could accommodate ground deformation without transmitting damaging forces to the architectural elements above. These terraces functioned as seismic isolation systems that absorbed earthquake energy before it could reach the buildings, reducing dynamic loads that might otherwise exceed structural capacity. Site geology played a fundamental role in earthquake-resistant design, with Inca engineers selecting building locations that provided optimal seismic response characteristics. The granite bedrock beneath Machu Picchu offered stable support that wouldn't liquefy or settle during earthquake loading, while the specific rock formations provided natural amplification characteristics that the engineers learned to work with rather than against. Seismic load paths through the building structures were carefully designed to ensure that earthquake forces would be transmitted safely from the points where they entered the buildings to the foundation systems where they could be absorbed by the bedrock. These load paths avoided structural discontinuities and stress concentrations that could create failure points during dynamic loading, creating continuous force transmission systems that distributed seismic energy throughout the entire structural system. The construction sequencing for earthquake-resistant building incorporated temporary bracing and support systems that maintained structural stability during construction, while allowing the gradual development of the interlocking systems that would provide ultimate seismic resistance. These temporary systems had to provide adequate stability without interfering with the final structural performance characteristics that would determine earthquake survival. Dynamic response analysis using primitive but effective testing methods allowed Inca engineers to evaluate how their structures would behave under different types of ground motion. While they lacked modern mathematical analysis tools, they understood how to test structural flexibility and dynamic characteristics using physical methods that provided reliable information about seismic performance capabilities. Material properties of the granite used in construction provided inherent advantages for earthquake resistance, with the stone's strength and durability characteristics well suited for dynamic loading conditions. The Inca understanding of how different stone types would perform under seismic loading influenced their quarry selection and stone cutting techniques, ensuring that materials were optimally matched to structural requirements. The maintenance systems developed for earthquake-resistant structures included procedures for inspecting and repairing seismic damage that might accumulate over time from smaller earthquakes that didn't cause obvious structural failures. These maintenance techniques preserved the long-term integrity of earthquake-resistant systems, while providing early warning of potential problems that could compromise seismic performance during future events. Historical seismic performance has validated the effectiveness of Inca earthquake-resistant engineering, with Machu Picchu surviving numerous major earthquakes over the past 5 centuries without suffering significant structural damage. The devastating 1950 Cusco earthquake that destroyed many modern buildings in the region left Machu Picchu essentially unscathed, demonstrating the superiority of ancient engineering principles over contemporary construction techniques. Redundant structural systems throughout the buildings provided multiple load paths and backup resistance mechanisms that ensured structural survival even if individual components were damaged during earthquake loading. This redundancy reflected deep understanding of reliability engineering principles that recognize the inherent uncertainties in predicting earthquake characteristics and structural response. The integration of seismic resistance with architectural aesthetics demonstrated that earthquake engineering need not compromise visual appeal or functional performance. The Inca achieved earthquake resistance through design features that enhanced, rather than detracted from architectural beauty, creating structures that satisfied human aesthetic sensibilities while providing the technical performance necessary for survival in a seismically active environment. Modern seismic analysis of Machu Picchu structures continues to reveal engineering principles that inform contemporary earthquake-resistant design, proving that the ancient Inca achieved seismic performance standards that remain challenging targets for modern structural engineers working with advanced materials and analytical tools that were unavailable to ancient builders who relied solely on empirical knowledge and construction experience. As the final stones were fitted into their eternal positions, and the last interior details received their finishing touches, Machu Picchu emerged complete from the mountain mists like a vision made manifest in rose-coloured granite, a city that had been carved from impossibility itself, standing as humanity's greatest triumph over the limitations of geography, technology, and human endurance. The completion of Machu Picchu represented not just architectural achievement, but the culmination of nearly a century of continuous construction work that had tested every aspect of Inca engineering knowledge and organizational capability. From the first survey of the mountain peaks to the final polish applied to ceremonial stone surfaces, this project had demanded innovations in quarrying, transport, construction, and urban planning that pushed ancient technology to its absolute limits. By the time construction reached completion, around 1450 CE, Machu Picchu had become far more than a city. It was a demonstration of what human determination could accomplish when vision met unwavering commitment to excellence. Every stone told the story of problems solved, challenges overcome, and impossibilities transformed into architectural poetry that would inspire wonder for centuries to come. The final construction phases focused on the ceremonial and astronomical elements that would integrate Machu Picchu with the cosmic order that governed Inca spiritual life. The Intihuatana stone, that remarkable granite pillar that served as a precise astronomical observatory, received its final shaping during these last months of construction work. Master stoneworkers spent weeks achieving the exact angles and proportions that would allow this carved stone to track solar movements with accuracy that rivaled modern instruments. The Temple of the Sun received its completing touches during this final period, with the curved wall that followed the natural bedrock contours achieving the seamless integration between human craftsmanship and natural stone that represented the pinnacle of Inca architectural philosophy. The window openings in this sacred structure were positioned with mathematical precision to frame specific celestial events, creating a building that functioned simultaneously as architecture and astronomical instrument. The agricultural terraces reached their full productive capacity as the final soil amendments were added and the last irrigation channels received their finishing work. The terraced gardens that cascaded down the mountain slopes represented not just food production systems, but living proof that human ingenuity could create abundance even in the most challenging environments. The sight of green crops flourishing at this impossible altitude must have filled the builders with profound satisfaction at their achievement. Population growth during the final construction years brought Machu Picchu to life as a functioning community, rather than merely an impressive construction site. Families moved into the completed residential areas. Craftsmen established workshops in spaces designed specifically for their trades, and the rhythms of daily life began to overlay the sounds of construction work that had echoed through the mountain canyons for decades. The administrative systems that had coordinated the massive construction project evolved into the governmental structures necessary for managing a permanent mountain community. The organizational skills that had moved thousands of tons of stone up impossible slopes were redirected toward managing food distribution, craft production, ceremonial activities, and the countless details of daily life that determined whether this remote mountain city would thrive or merely survive. Yet even as Machu Picchu reached the height of its achievement, the broader Inca Empire faced challenges that would ultimately determine the fate of this mountain masterpiece. Spanish conquistadors led by Francisco Pizarro had begun their devastating conquest of the Inca realm, bringing diseases, weapons, and military tactics that the sophisticated Inca armies were unprepared to counter effectively. The strategic location that had made Machu Picchu an ideal refuge during earlier conflicts now became its salvation during the Spanish conquest. Hidden in cloud forest and accessible only through treacherous mountain paths unknown to European explorers, Machu Picchu remained invisible to the conquistadors who systematically destroyed every other major Inca center they could locate. The decision to abandon Machu Picchu wasn't made from defeat, but from strategic wisdom that recognized the changing realities of a world where traditional Inca ways of life could no longer be sustained in major population centers. Rather than allow their sacred city to be desecrated by foreign invaders, the inhabitants chose to withdraw, leaving their architectural masterpiece to the protective isolation of the mountain peaks. The abandonment process was conducted with the same careful planning that had characterized every aspect of Machu Picchu's construction. Valuable objects were removed and hidden in secure locations, while less portable elements were left in positions that would facilitate future reoccupation if circumstances ever permitted the city's restoration. The agricultural terraces were prepared for extended dormancy, with drainage systems cleared and soil amendments applied to preserve productivity during the uncertain years ahead. As the last inhabitants descended the mountain paths that had once brought construction materials and supplies to the building site, they left behind architecture that would remain essentially unchanged for over 4 centuries. The cloud forest began its patient work of concealment, with vines and vegetation gradually obscuring the stone structures without damaging the underlying construction that had been built to geological rather than human timescales. Local indigenous populations maintained knowledge of Machu Picchu's location throughout the colonial period, but this information was carefully guarded from Spanish authorities who might have ordered the destruction of this powerful symbol of Inca achievement. The city slept under its blanket of vegetation, protected by secrecy and natural isolation from the political upheavals that transformed the broader region. The rediscovery of Machu Picchu by Hiram Bingham in 1911 introduced this architectural marvel to a world that had forgotten such achievements were possible without modern technology. Bingham's photographs and descriptions captured global imagination, inspiring archaeological expeditions that would gradually reveal the full extent of Inca engineering sophistication. Modern conservation efforts face the challenge of preserving Machu Picchu for future generations while managing the tourism pressure created by its worldwide fame. The same isolation that protected the city for centuries now complicates efforts to provide the resources necessary for ongoing maintenance and protection of these irreplaceable stone structures. UNESCO World Heritage designation has provided international recognition and support for conservation work, but the fundamental challenge remains unchanged: how to preserve architecture that was built for eternity while accommodating modern visitors who want to experience the wonder that the original builders achieved through their impossible vision. Contemporary archaeological research continues to reveal new aspects of Machu Picchu's construction and function, using ground-penetrating radar, advanced photography, and digital reconstruction techniques to understand construction details that aren't visible to casual observation. Each new discovery adds to our appreciation of Inca engineering capabilities while raising new questions about achievements that continue to challenge modern understanding. Educational programs now bring the story of Machu Picchu's construction to audiences worldwide, inspiring new generations of engineers, architects, and dreamers who find hope and motivation in this proof that human ingenuity can overcome any obstacle. The city that began as one civilization's impossible dream has become humanity's shared heritage and eternal reminder of our unlimited potential. Standing today among the stone terraces where Inca engineers once solved problems that would challenge modern technology, visitors from around the world experience the same wonder that must have filled the original builders when they first saw their completed masterpiece emerging from the mountain mists. Machu Picchu endures not just as architecture, but as eternal testament to the power of human vision, determination, and the refusal to accept that anything is truly impossible. The rose-red stones still glow at sunset, just as they did when Inca craftsmen first laid them in their perfect positions. The mountain winds still sing through the precise doorways and windows, carrying whispers of ancient knowledge across peaks that have witnessed the greatest architectural achievement in human history. And in that eternal song, the voices of long-departed builders continue to remind us that with sufficient vision, patience, and courage, human hands can reshape mountains themselves. As night settles over the ancient peaks of the Andes, and stars emerge above the rose-coloured stones that have witnessed 5 centuries of mountain storms and passing seasons, Machu Picchu rests in the same peaceful silence that has protected this architectural miracle since the day its builders laid down their bronze tools and stepped back to admire their completed dream. The city sleeps as it has slept for generations, cradled between the towering peaks of Huayna Picchu and Machu Picchu mountains, where morning mists still rise from the cloud forest below, just as they did when Inca engineers first surveyed this impossible construction site and saw not obstacles, but opportunities waiting to be transformed by human vision. Tonight, the same constellations that guided ancient astronomers shine down on the Intihuatana stone, that remarkable granite pillar that continues to mark the passage of celestial time with the same precision that amazed its creators. The Temple of the Sun stands silhouetted against the starlit sky, its curved walls following the bedrock contours with seamless perfection that speaks to the harmony possible between human craftsmanship and natural beauty. Water still flows through the stone channels carved by masters who understood that life could flourish even at the edge of the possible. The sound of moving water echoes softly through the terraced fountains, creating the same gentle music that once accompanied daily life in this mountain sanctuary, where engineering genius created abundance from barrenness. The agricultural terraces step down the mountainside in geometric progression, their stone retaining walls holding soil that was carried up impossible slopes, basket by basket, grain by grain, through the determination of workers who refused to accept that fertile farmland couldn't exist where nature had provided only vertical stone and howling wind. In the residential areas where families once lived and worked, the trapezoidal doorways frame views of distant peaks that stretch to every horizon. These openings, shaped to resist earthquake forces while creating perfect proportions that please the human eye, remind us that functional engineering and aesthetic beauty need never be enemies, but can work together to create architecture that serves both practical needs and spiritual aspirations. The mortarless stone construction that has survived centuries of earthquakes continues to demonstrate principles of flexible strength that modern engineers study and admire. Each perfectly fitted joint between massive granite blocks tells the story of patience, precision, and understanding that human achievement becomes truly permanent only when it works in harmony with rather than against the natural forces that shape our world. Hidden beneath the visible architecture, the drainage systems and structural foundations continue their silent work of preservation, protecting this mountain masterpiece from the erosive forces that have claimed so many other monuments to human ambition. These invisible engineering systems remind us that the most important achievements often remain unseen. Their success measured not by applause, but by the quiet endurance that allows dreams to survive across centuries. Archaeological research continues to reveal new secrets hidden within Machu Picchu's stone construction, with each discovery adding to our understanding of capabilities that seemed impossible until they were accomplished. Ground-penetrating radar reveals hidden chambers and structural details that speak to engineering sophistication that challenges our assumptions about what ancient civilizations could achieve with determination and ingenuity. Conservation efforts work tirelessly to protect these irreplaceable stones for future generations, balancing the need for preservation against the desire to share this wonder with visitors who travel from every corner of the world to witness proof that human beings can accomplish anything when vision meets unwavering commitment to excellence. Modern engineers study Machu Picchu's construction techniques, seeking solutions to contemporary challenges in sustainable building, earthquake resistance, and water management. The ancient Inca masters continue to teach lessons about working with natural systems rather than against them, creating architecture that enhances rather than degrades the environments that sustain all life. Children around the world learn the story of Machu Picchu's construction, finding inspiration in this proof that obstacles exist only to be overcome, that impossibility is simply another challenge waiting for the right combination of creativity, persistence, and courage. Each new generation discovers in these mountain stones the same message that inspired their builders, that human potential knows no boundaries when guided by vision and sustained by determination. The sunrise that will illuminate Machu Picchu tomorrow morning will strike the same rose-coloured granite that first glowed under ancient light, when Inca craftsmen completed their impossible dream. The shadows that will play across perfectly carved surfaces will create the same patterns of light and darkness that were calculated by architects who understood that true beauty emerges from the marriage of human artistry with natural phenomena. Time moves differently in these mountain heights, where centuries pass like seasons, and human achievements merge with geological permanence. The stones remember every hand that shaped them, every tool that carved them, every vision that guided their placement in walls that have outlasted empires and will outlast those yet to come. Rest now, knowing that such wonders exist in our world, that human hands once accomplished what seems impossible even today, that vision and determination can transform any limitation into opportunity, any obstacle into stepping stone toward achievement that echoes across centuries. Sleep peacefully, surrounded by the knowledge that you too carry within yourself the same potential that raised Machu Picchu from barren mountain peaks, the same creativity that solved impossible problems, the same persistence that refused to accept defeat, the same courage that dared to dream in stone and made those dreams eternal reality. The mountain city waits in starlit silence, patient and permanent, forever whispering the ancient truth that nothing is impossible for those who possess the wisdom to envision, the skill to plan, the determination to begin, and the faith to continue until impossibility becomes inevitability, carved in stone that will endure as long as mountains stand and stars shine down on human dreams made manifest. Dream well, dream deeply, and remember that you too can carve wonders from the mountains of impossibility that await your vision, your courage, and your unwavering belief in the unlimited potential that dwells within every human heart, brave enough to attempt the impossible. Machu Picchu endures, eternal, beautiful, and forever yours.